Captain Frankie, good morning, sir. Welcome to episode 10 of Between the Levees. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
You recently retired, did you not?
That's correct. April the 1st of this year.
April 1st. That's a hell of a day to choose to end it, huh?
Just the way it worked out.
Roger, Roger. What you been doing since then?
Well, we had plans to travel this summer, but toward the end of April, last part of April, first part of May, I developed AFib,
Hmm.
and all of our traveling this summer has been to doctors.
Well, that's no fun. That's not the way to start your retirement, sir.
Not at all.
Well, let's start back at the beginning. Where were you born?
I was born in Fort Walton Beach, Florida.
What was childhood? How was growing up?
Well, I lived in Destin, Florida. Uh, I was born into a commercial fishing family,
Okay.
and as early as my mother would allow me to, I was on the boat with my father. So as early as I could, I went to work for the boat company that he was working for. So
Okay.
I spent my childhood working on the party fishing boats in Destin.
How long had the family been in the business?
Well, my father had ran a boat. We were working for the Kelly's Boat Service, and he had ran a boat for them for about 40 years. So shortly after World War II, he went to work for them.
What was his military service? How long was he in? Was it just the draft for the war?
He was drafted for the war, but prior to being drafted, he was operating a an Army Air Corps crash and recovery boat out of what back then was Eglin Field, became Eglin Air Force Base.
Okay.
Uh, I mean, he had an extensive maritime career before that, working on dredge tending boats and commercial fishing boats. Uh, in the military as a combat engineer. Went to Europe. Uh, he landed in Europe about a month after D-Day, so he actually landed in Cherbourg. But spent a good bit of time crossing France and Bavaria and those areas.
What did your his parents do? What was your grandfather do?
Well, his father was a sharecropper. He was a farmer, and he
Hmm.
also worked for the railroad running from southeast Alabama over into Mobile. Uh, I never did know him. He was murdered in
Hmm.
somewhere around 1923.
No kidding. What did your mother do growing up?
Well, my mother had a house full of kids, so she raised kids.
All
Yes, there
right.
was seven of us.
What are they all up to? Did they find different paths through life?
Well, yes, yeah, we were all kind of went different directions. My oldest brother went into the Air Force, retired from the Air Force with 23 years.
Hmm.
Uh, he had a twin, my sister. She was a homemaker. My next sister down, she did various kinds of jobs, worked in a grocery store and a sewing facility and hospitality and different things, whatever she could find at the time to help support her family. And the
Hmm.
next brother down, he was career Army. He uh, he retired with 22 years, and for the most part, his Army career was all on Army boats, uh, both tugs and landing craft.
Hmm.
My next sister down was married into the Army, and she was a homemaker. And then it's myself, and then my youngest brother, and he has done just whatever work he could find to help make ends meet.
Sure. Did you have any military service?
I did not.
Tell me what life was like growing up on as often as you could on a commercial fishing vessel.
Well, days were long. From about between 9 and 10 years old in the summer, I was on those boats every day. I was working full time at that point.
Hmm.
Uh, Started off, I'd be down at the dock about 7 o'clock, and I would between 6 and 7, and I would bag up ice for sale for the day. pump gas to other people going fishing, and I would prepare salted bait for the boats to load for the next day's fishing.
Okay.
Which split the fish off the backbones and pack it in rock salt to toughen it up for bait. And when I started working primarily on the boats, then I was on the boat every morning about 5:30 or 6 o'clock. That would have been later that same year.
So this was age 10, you said?
Yeah, yeah, age 10,
What year would that have put us in?
1965.
65. Okay. How were you in school? Did you care too much about anything academically?
I I was somewhat in a zombie state most of the time because I was exhausted, but
Sure.
I did manage to pass my courses.
Yeah. All right. So was high school the end of the road for you academically?
Uh, yes, until I started taking professional classes. Uh,
Okay.
I've taken a few courses to help further develop my career.
Sure. But that was later.
Yes, much later.
Okay. Well, did you go straight into towboating at 18, or were you still commercial fishing, or what was that transition?
I commercial fished until January of 75. So that would have
Okay.
been 2 years after high school.
Hmm.
And reality was starting to set in, I suppose, about commercial fishing. We tended to not work through the winter. We didn't have insurance. We
Hmm.
didn't have retirement. And I was starting to mature enough to recognize that. Some
Yeah.
of my older friends had already transitioned to towboats, and one of them called me one day and asked me if I would be interested. So the next day I caught a boat with him in Mobile.
And this was around 75, you said?
That was January 27th, 75 was my first day on a towboat.
What was your onboarding process for that?
I spent about half of the day getting a physical, and then about 1:30 in the afternoon, I was on the boat getting hands-on training on generator switchovers, bilge pumps, how to check those engines. Of course, I had a background in that already coming from the fishing boats, but uh, learning learning the process on the boat.
Hmm. What was it like stepping on the very first time? I knew nothing about towboats for a good, what was that, 2015, I believe. So almost 30 years. I'd seen them pass by sitting at the levee, but I'd never been close to one. And then I was able to get on board when I started back in 2015.
Well, for me that day, of course, they introduced me to a work vest immediately. Uh,
Uh-huh.
I had the benefit of working for a company that was really strong on their safety requirements.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and later that same afternoon, I came to realize the importance of that work vest in that what is now back then the boat was operated by Compass Marine. Today it is owned by Ingram Barge Company, the Charlie
Okay.
C.
Okay.
He was coming out of Mobile with 4 loads of coal and had a deckhand go off to fall overboard at the
Hmm.
second coupling out from the boat. Nobody on the tow had a work vest on. He went overboard at the second coupling, and the only thing that was ever recovered from that young man was his ball cap.
Hmm.
And he had no work vest on, and that burned that work vest onto me from that point on. I never had an issue putting it on.
Right. It's a hell of a start. So what was your hitch back then?
We worked on that particular boat, which we stayed in Mobile Harbor. We worked 14 to 7.
Was that just like a regular fleet job these days? 7 days, 7 days, 7 nights, seven off?
No, no, we were once we got on the boat, we were on the boat for 14
Okay,
days.
so it was a live on. Okay.
It was a live on, but it was a fleet boat. I mean, we did all of that was with Radcliffe Material in Mobile, and
Hmm.
we did all the primary shifting around our facility.
Okay. What was your decking career? How'd you end up moving up into the wheelhouse, and how many companies was that, and all that kind of stuff?
I actually stayed on deck. I think on deck of towboats for 5 years. I was not in any hurry to get in the wheelhouse because
Hmm.
I already understood that for that guy to do his job, he had to know my job. So I
Right.
wanted to stay on deck until I knew my job.
Sure.
And of course, now I started steering a little bit. That the captain that we had, he uh, he worked with two of us. None of us were, neither of us were on the payroll as steersmen, but he worked with two of us at different times,
Hmm.
and started getting us pointed in the right direction. Of course, after my watch work was done, I would go up and sit behind him. Now I had changed boats by that point, still the same company but a different boat. Uh, he would allow us, once our watch work was done, to go up and sit in the pilot house and watch him transit through bridges or areas along the run that were a bit more of a challenge.
Hmm.
And so the run from Mobile, uh, probably as far east as Panama City, Florida, I knew it before I was being paid to be in the pilot house.
Sure. Okay. Well, once you got up into the, or let me back up. Do you have any interesting tidbits of history when you were on deck?
Probably the biggest thing that I remember thinking about my decking was the day that that young man fell off of that tow and was
Yeah.
never recovered.
Right.
That happened. That happened about 200 feet from us. They were
Hmm.
literally going past us when it happened. We
Yeah.
were tied up at our dock there in Mobile. And when I think of things that happened when I was decking, that's probably the one that lights up the whole board.
And that was early on, you said, right?
Very first day,
Yeah.
I'd been on the boat less than an hour.
It's quite the awakening to the
Yep,
realities
yep.
out there.
Been on the boat less than an hour, and there I was looking for a man overboard.
Yeah. What did you get into the wheelhouse with Compass?
I actually got my first taste of the wheelhouse as a pilot with a company called Florida Marine Service,
Okay.
which is not the Florida Marine you think of today. This particular one was out of Panama City,
Hmm.
and at the time they operated two boats, and they were moving gasoline barges primarily.
How long were you on that run?
I worked for them just a little over a year, maybe 14 months, something like that. And then I went to Compass.
Okay. Where that was all in Mobile, or did you come to the river at that point?
When I well, we would with Florida Marine, we would make trips through the river and over to the Atchafalaya.
Okay.
I didn't get a lot of Mississippi River time other than just going through. Uh, and
Like
I went.
like from industrial to Algiers?
That's correct.
Okay.
Or up to Harvey or something. But
Yeah.
it was,
Yeah.
and even with Compass in my early years with Compass, I was pushing coal from New Orleans to Pensacola.
Hmm.
So for the most part, my early years with them, it was from industrial up to what was then Gulf Fleet, and then back down to industrial.
What milepost was that?
Uh, Gulf Fleet is 95, I think 95.4, something like that.
So right
Directly,
there near Zito's Algiers fleet, or is it that same
that's
fleet?
the same fleet, same
Okay.
fleet.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. Uh, how did your career advance from there?
Well, I after I think it was about 8.5 years, I went to work for Compass in 81, and in 89, I had the opportunity to go to work on some bigger equipment, some 3,000 horsepower boats. And I left Compass and went to work for General Marine,
Hmm.
still pushing gasoline barges again, or oil barges. General Marine was out of Greenville, Mississippi. And I went to work for them in May, I believe it was, of '89.
All right. And what was that run? What were you shoving more barges? What was the deal with the larger horsepower?
Well, it was a four-piece unit tow, so it was three 300-foot barges and one, uh, well, usually about 150-foot barge.
Hmm.
3,000 horsepower boat with 3,300 horsepower boats, uh, running from the New Orleans area, sometimes as far north as St. Paul.
Okay.
So it was a spot market run. So wherever the oil company had stuff they needed moved to and from,
Hmm.
we would take off with it.
Okay. So that covered a lot of ground, huh?
It did. It did. I got to learn a lot of river.
What was uh what was your favorite run ever?
Oh my goodness.
And why?
I suppose I would have to choose that. Well, bar none. If I was going to pick an absolute favorite, it would be running across the Gulf Coast back into Florida.
Okay.
Uh, of course, I that's my roots. So I guess that would be the reason for that being
Yeah.
favorite. Uh, I ran that stretch as far as any singular particular run. I ran that stretch the longest. Uh, I've probably got 11 or 12 years total just running from New Orleans into Florida.
Uh-huh.
Uh, the next would probably be the Tennessee River, uh, and 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 up there, as you go as you go above one lock to the next. Of course, they refer to those as pools. Getting to appreciate the quality of the water from one pool to the next pool.
Yeah.
Watts Bar Pool was always the prettiest water I think I'd ever seen. Uh, but then you read into the history of Watts Bar Pool, and you find out that potentially it's, even though very attractive to look at, may be the most contaminated.
Hmm.
Uh, our country's first nuclear waste spill was on that pool.
Okay.
So looks are not everything.
Sure. Sure. I guess what was next in your professional life?
I suppose I started looking into doing delivery work, yacht type delivery work, and expanding my passenger vessel license. Uh, by then, I had, well, actually, early on in my career, I had attained both a towing license and a passenger license. So I've started looking at increasing my tonnage qualifications on my
Hmm.
passenger license. So I was I started growing license a little bit more. Uh, Eventually getting to 1600 ton near coastal, and I'm trying to get them straightened out in my head. A master of towing near coastal western rivers, and 16 master 1600 ton near coastal and Great Lakes. I think,
Okay.
I don't think the western rivers is included on it. Maybe also AB unlimited. Of
Okay.
course, my radar certification is Oceans Unlimited. I never did do any celestial navigation testing. I didn't feature myself doing any transoceanic work.
Did you get married somewhere along the way?
I did 1976. Uh,
Okay, so that was quite early on with your career. How did y'all meet?
well, one of the boats I was working on with Radcliffe Material was running down into our home area down here, and if we were in there on that boat, if we were in the area on Sundays, well, let me back up on that. What we
Hmm.
would do on that boat is we carried a crane with us everywhere we went because we pushed gravel and oyster shells, clam shells. We would go on a location. A lot of those locations had curfews. So at certain times of the day, we couldn't unload. And in most cases, a lot of times all night, we had to shut down. So if we were on a location on a Sunday and in our area here around home, we would make it a family day. We might fry chicken and fry fish or have watermelons and cakes. We'd make family day out of it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And the relief captain that I had on the boat had his wife come to the boat this particular day, and he had a young son. I guess he's 3 or 4 years old, but very active kid. And told his wife to grab his sister, who was 17, to bring with her to help manage their son. And then when they left the boat, they could go back by the mall or something and do some shopping.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the day that I met her. About a week and a half later, we had our first date. And 3 months and 3 days later, we were married.
Okay. Weren't wasting any time there.
No, indeed. No,
Good.
indeed. She was still a senior in high school, had 8 months to go to graduate. So instead of her moving to Destin, I moved to Freeport so she wouldn't have to change schools.
All right.
And we've just recently, well, October, we celebrated our 46th anniversary.
Congratulations. Did y'all have any children along the way?
We have two. We have two daughters.
Mm-hmm.
One of
What
them
are
is a
they?
homemaker and a at home. She schools her kids at home, so she's an at home school teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the youngest one. And the oldest one works at the Emerald Coast Technical College, which is the VOTEC here in our county, and she counsels kids on scholarships and grant programs and helps them get financing for their courses.
Okay. Well, I know, of course, you ended up at Ingram Barge. I don't know if we've made that leap yet in your career path, but where did that happen in the timeline?
At some point with General Marine, early on with General Marine, Ingram Barge Company, I'd say probably in the first 3 or 4 months, Ingram Barge Company bought the boats that General Marine was operating. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
General Marine was operating boats for System Fuel Incorporated, which was the fuel wing of, oh goodness, I don't remember the name of that power company. Uh, it included Arkansas Power and Light, Louisiana, all of Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas power plants, and
Okay.
SFI provided the fuel for all of that. So that's who General Marine was working for, operating their boats. Well, Ingram bought all the boats and barges.
Okay.
Uh, General Marine continued to operate the boats for 2 years, and then Ingram took over the operation of the boats, and I was extended an invitation to apply for a job with Ingram at that point, and
Mm-hmm.
came over into Ingram, and that would have been uh, spring of '91.
Okay. And then what was your career path with Ingram up until April?
I stayed on unit tows until Ingram Barge Company sold that off to Coastal, and then initially I transferred over to or changed over to Coastal Towing Company of Houston. Stayed with them 8 months, and then came back into Ingram.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Went to the Andrew Benedict initially, uh, pushing EDC, ethylene dichloride, from Lake Charles, Louisiana to Calvert City, Kentucky.
Okay.
I stayed on it for a year, and then went over to the Sam Fleming as captain. Uh, we were on it. We were pushing cumene from Corpus Christi, Texas, to Mount Vernon, Indiana. Of course, we did some spot work, and then later on, as those contracts dried up, then we started doing coal work out of South Point down into the power plants on the Ohio and different areas.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I was trying to think. Eventually, I transferred from the Sam Fleming to the Neil Deal on the upper, and worked on the Neal deal for 2 years, and then transferred to the New Orleans area onto what was then the Pat C. The Pat C later renamed to the David Cert.
Hmm.
And I finished my last 18 years with Ingram. I was on that boat.
What was what was the hitch with on the cert?
We we worked 28-28.
And what was a regular hitch for you? Was that still same service as it is now? Up that like to the hole and back up to Capitol, that kind of run?
Yeah, and sometimes we would go up above Baton Rouge, but primarily it was from range between Capitol and Myrtle Grove or Dave Vance. I don't like referring to that area as the whole. It just creates, in my mind, ugly connotations, and I avoid that. But so many
Understood.
people refer to it that way.
Yeah, it's pretty common in the offices anyway.
Yeah.
Well, tell me about your experience out there in that on that run from Myrtle Grove to
Well,
Capitol.
for me, it was the work overall was pretty busy for me because I was planning tows all the time, and it somebody came on the boat one time and asked me about planning a tow, and I said, well, I'm not just planning one tow. And I actually had, it was either 5 or 6 separate tows,
Right.
orders for separate tows on the clipboard. And I showed them, I said, I'm not just planning one, I've got all of these I'm already working on. And so David North and the guys up there around his office, they were working their magic on figuring out what was going to go in each one, and then I was figuring out how they would go together best to make it as simple as possible going up the
Hmm.
river for making drops and additional pickups.
Right.
But as far as the river itself, for me, it was uh, well, I enjoyed that run.
Okay.
Uh, I had and still have a good working relationship with most of the other boats that I would interact with during the day, as well as the ship pilots
Hmm.
with the different groups. There were some of them that sometime would be a bit belligerent, but for the most part, I had real good working relationships with all those guys.
Yeah. Well, 18 years, I guess you better, huh?
Yeah, well, if you want things to go smoothly, you need to work on that pretty early.
Yeah. When did you first cross paths with Marty Mahoney and David North?
Marty Mahoney was a driver for Compass Marine, I think, when I first met him, probably 88, 87 or 88. And
Hmm.
David North was dispatching for Midland. I think he was in the office down there at Algiers when I was pushing coal from what was then Orgulf Fleet to Panama City. So that would have been back in the early '80s.
Right. So of all the waterways you've been on, all the miles you've shoved, what was the I guess the prettiest, the best view?
Probably up on the Tennessee River.
What were you
Uh,
running up there?
we were carrying asphalt up to
Okay.
Knoxville. I
Okay.
had the I had the pleasure, I have the pleasure of being able to say that I went all the way out the end of the Tennessee River. Uh, I don't know if you're familiar with it above Knoxville, but the French Broad and the Holston Rivers run together to form the Tennessee. I discharged at a dock about a mile from the end of the river, and in order to turn around to come back out, I went up to the French Broad, or the Holston River actually, pushed the tow up into the Holston, backed back up into the French Broad, and then started back down the Tennessee. So I have ran every inch of the Tennessee River.
Yeah.
Something else that we could bounce all around a little bit is some of the extracurricular stuff I've done in behalf of the industry, Gulf on the Coast Canal Association, Ingram Barge Company, through the years, as well as for the Coast Guard. Uh, During the development of the hurricane surge barriers east and west of New Orleans.
Hmm.
I was involved primarily with the Lake Borgne surge barrier, but I was involved with a lot of the computer simulation testing on
Hmm.
that facility. Uh, for a year and a half on my days off, I would typically spend between a week and 2 weeks in Vicksburg at the experimental station of the Corps of Engineers, running computer simulated trials on that facility, hoping to see modifications to it before the design was locked in.
Right.
But like I said, for a year and a half, every time I got off the boat, I was up there for at least 1 week, but a lot of times 2 weeks. Uh, Also, during my career, during high water episodes, when vessel traffic coordination center was opened in Baton Rouge during high water,
Hmm.
uh, it was staffed by the industry volunteers, and I would along with some other Ingram Barge Company personnel, usually an ops manager or somebody.
Hmm.
We would go up there for 3 or 4 days at a time to cover that. I don't know. I did that 2 or 3 times. And after Hurricane Rita in Lake Charles, they had a tremendous backlog of traffic at Calcasieu Lock,
Hmm.
and and Gulf Intercoastal Canal Association uh, provided industry volunteers to help facilitate traffic movement through that lock.
Hmm.
And I was over there on behalf of Ingram Barge Company for 3 days for that.
Were you running a boat or managing? What
No,
was the?
I was actually in the control house in the lock,
Okay.
and they we would man their radio and coordinate the boats getting to the lock, and if they needed a helper boat to push the lock, because they weren't actually locking, they were, if you could push through it with a helper
Hmm.
boat, they would let you push through it. I don't know how hard that current was running through it, but it was an extreme current running through
So
that
that
thing.
they had
Uh,
both gates open.
yes,
Gotcha.
yes, and the people that lived on the island actually had threatened to start shooting into the complex if both the gates if the gates closed, because it was the island that was flooding,
Right.
and they they threatened to start shooting into the complex.
Wow. Do you get that anywhere else along the canal?
I have never been threatened with being shot anywhere myself. I was always very careful with people that lived along the banks of the canal,
Hmm.
trying to be careful with my lights and wheel wash and that sort of thing. Uh, and considering the amount of water they had in the situation they were in with there at Lake Charles with following the Hurricane Rita, that lock is the only discharge they had for all that water
Right.
that they had backed up. And I didn't agree with what they were planning to do, but I do somewhat understand it.
Hmm. Yeah, I've heard some horror stories about going through the Port Allen route there below Bayou Sorrel Lock and those bends.
Well,
As far as residents, right there.
well, some people, some of our counterparts do not pay enough attention to what they're doing. They get in too big of a hurry and they're rolling too much water, or they drop too deep in a bend and throw wheel wash. You counter steer and that wheel wash blows straight up in somebody's yard. That
Right.
we can operate in a way to prevent that.
Yeah. What else can we cover, sir?
I don't
I feel
know.
like there's got to be more.
My career was so short. It only lasted under a license. It only lasted 42 years. What could there
Yeah,
be?
I'm sure there's more. What's the toughest situation you've been subjected to out there that you obviously got out of?
Probably one of the worst that I was in uh, was a high water a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago. We had dropped my boat back to 20 barges, And goodness, I don't remember what the river stage was at New Orleans. It was 17 plus, 17.1, 17.2. River was extremely swift.
Hmm.
And I got tangled up. I don't mean actually physically, but in the pattern of their traffic. Uh, had a ship coming down behind me, one I didn't know about that was coming up below me, and we were right there at the GNO bridge, and almost had to share the bridge with a southbound ship, and didn't either one of us want to be in there with the other, but,
Yeah.
but because of my relationship with those guys, they knew what my situation was. They knew what I normally could do,
Right.
and the one coming behind me, he was he worked really well with me and for me that evening. And
Hmm.
when it was all said and done, it was just another day at the factory. But it was not a fun chair to be sitting in there for a little while.
Yeah. And you said that was a 20 barge still?
We had the David Cert back to 20 barges. Generally, the David Cert will throw 20 barges anywhere you want them to go.
Hmm.
But as the river picked up in velocity, and it doesn't matter what the number is for the river gauge, it's how quickly it's rising or how quickly it's falling that
Hmm.
changes the velocity. It is that velocity that gets you trapped.
What kind of horsepower was it? Is the cert?
8400.
8,400. So
Yes.
with 20, would you have been five long, four wide, or four long, five wide in high
Now
river?
I was 5 long and 4 wide.
Okay.
And for me, the important thing all the time was being able to stop.
Right.
Wasn't I didn't care about being able to steer bends. I can flank the bends, but I always wanted to make sure I could stop. So I always tried to build my toe in a way that I knew she would stop them.
Yeah. Tell me something about your career coming to a close and getting off the boat. Are you still tripping occasionally?
I haven't been back on a boat since March the 3rd.
Okay.
Uh, and I've been reluctant to even think that direction. I've already had one heart ablation trying to get this AFib corrected.
Hmm. Hmm.
It worked for 19 days, and then I went back into AFib. So I'm working now with my cardiologist and the surgery team that did the last ablation. We're trying to figure out which way we want to go. My doctors tell me there's no reason why I couldn't ride a boat with this. Well, I tend to want to disagree with them. If I
Sure.
stand up very quickly, I have to
Hmm.
hold on to something or I'll fall over. If I
Right.
try to go across the room too quickly, I got to do the same thing when I get to wherever I stop, or I may
Yeah.
end up having to stop. So I've avoided. Well, that's the reason we hadn't done any traveling is that I don't have any go in me. I can
Yeah.
drive forever, but once we get there, I can't do anything.
Yeah. Well, sir, I do hope very soon all that gets resolved and you get to enjoy your retirement.
Well, I appreciate that. I will probably get to a point where I'll I'll call some of them and see if they have a spot where I can come look out a window or something.
Sure. Sure. Well, look, good luck with all of that. I do hope to maybe do this again one day. I appreciate your time, and I will have this published as soon as I can.
Well, if you think of other questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
That sounds good, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.